In 2011, Momoiro Clover were renamed Momoiro Clover Z after Hayami Akari's graduation, and with that name change came an image change. Momoiro Clover up to that point had always mimicked the style and attitude of professional wrestling, as their manager, Kawakami Akira, is famously a big fan of it, among other things. By 2011, with the departure of Akari, it probably seemed as opportune a moment as ever before to explore new things in Japanese popular culture to parody. And so, with the birth of Momoiro Clover Z, also came the image change from larger-than-life pro wrestlers to idol Sentai. This shtick would last for a while, as the lead single off their album pretty much defined this new look as their image in 2011. It was so much so that they were still occasionally donning the same Sentai costumes in 2012. Paired with Momoko's rapid rise in success through 2012, they became increasingly recognizable in the mainstream, which meant that this image predictably became the most parodied in the Japanese adult video sphere. Seriously, there are way too many of these. It's a rabbit hole in and of itself, but one of these many parodies stands out from the rest. You might first look at Million Girls Z and conclude based on the name and its abbreviation MGZ to be an obvious parody of Momoiro Clover Z, since MCZ and MGZ look very similar. But this actually isn't true. Million Girls Z touts that they are one of the longest running rotational adult video idol groups that started all the way back in 2003. This means that Million Girls Z predates Momoiro Clover Z by 5 years. All this time, they have existed, presumably, as a parody to idols in a similar way as Ebisu Muscats, except much more underground. These types of idol groups could have a whole other video made about them, and maybe I will make that video eventually if there's any interest in that subject. In 2014, Million Girls Z changed their lineup with fresh new faces, and their great reboot was initiated. Part of this reboot meant releasing a brand new music video. The video, while getting some media coverage, is still relatively obscure, sitting at only 83,000 views. And it was at this point in the script when I realized that I kind of wrote myself into a corner. I thought I was only going to do a video about their series, but I guess it's impossible not to address 1 million telepathy. So, yeah, here's my review of the song and video. Musically, I'd say it's pretty competent. Aside from the People's Court vibe it gives in the beginning with that guitar and piano sound, once a song opens up, it's actually not so cheesy. Maybe it's nothing to write home about in any extreme way, but I do like the little modulation they do at the end of the chorus. The vocal performances themselves are actually quite good. I remember being really surprised when I first heard it because it didn't sound like it was from a group that was a collection of AV actresses, and instead sounded like what I would consider the classic golden era of AKB48. I like the vocal aesthetic quite a bit. Typical idol, yeah, but impressive considering the vocal performances usually expected from AV actresses don't usually include singing. As far as the video is concerned, it's actually a bit misleading. The video might give the impression that you will see a lot of Sentai antics, not unlike what Momoko did a couple years earlier, but you'd be wrong in that assumption. Most of the video contains the members of the group mostly dancing and singing in their Million Girls Z getup, intercut with short clips from them in everything from behind the scenes, micro bikinis, and the Sentai costumes. Overall, the video is maybe a little weaker than the song itself. You have a lot of little gaffes like girls not performing the choreography in sync, other girls mouthing along to lyrics when it's someone else's solo, and an overall overexposed look which was strangely common for idol videos in the early, mid-2010s but looks incredibly dated now. The music video was set up as not only a new song from Million Girls Z to perform live, because yes, they did perform live, but also as a springboard for another project they had underway. This project would be Zettai Sentai Midi Girls Z. Zettai Sentai Midi Girls Z is a short 7-episode fictional series on YouTube starring the girls from Million Girls Z. We follow their antics over the course of the series as they follow their quest to defeat Ikamon. Each video differs in length, with the shortest being 4 minutes and the longest being 8 minutes. This, though, includes their theme song and video, which plays at the end of every episode, so really when you break it down, the actual episodes are quite short. Because of the episode lengths, I wondered how I was going to go about talking about this series, but I figured the best way to begin talking about the series is to introduce the cast of characters. Also, for the remainder of this video, I'm going to refer to this series as Hentai Sentai, and you're going to see why in a second, so bear with me. He is a mysterious floating squid who exists to terrorize the world and keep the Hentai Sentai in check. He's kind of played up as being the arch nemesis of the Hentai Sentai, but a lot of his missions have him spying on them using a camera for his queen. In that way, he ends up being more like a voyeur. Of the Hentai Sentai group, Rika might be considered the leader. At the same time, though, she really doesn't act like one. Even though she has the red costume, I think the most defining aspect of her character isn't that she's the leader, but that she's the closest thing we have to a straight man. She's pretty normal when it comes to her character, including her hentai sensibilities. Her non-extreme character makes her a little unremarkable in some ways, but compared against the rest of the cast, it makes her out to be a little unique at the same time. Kizuna is the most extreme member of the group. She is very open and loud about her hentai tendencies, as she has a duffel bag full of tools for the job. And when it comes to her hentai moments, she's the most, well... She's also very charismatic and could easily be seen as the leader of the group as a result. Mihono is the quietest of all the Hentai Sentai. She isn't as outward about things as her colleagues, but she is arguably as much, if not more, hentai than Kizuna. As a result, you could say that her character could be summed up as the quiet girl who is secretly a freak. Christine is, I'm going to guess, the foreigner of the group. She has a similar level of charisma as Kizuna, but has a similar sense of control as Rika. She sometimes speaks English, which, along with her being pretty loud and very chipper with blondish hair, makes her the foreigner, or at the very least the hafu of the group. Kokomi is the true enemy of the Hentai Sentai. She is the one who orders what havoc Ikamon raises as she watches a Hentai Sentai from his camera. Her character is actually pretty sad, humorously enough. She watches a Hentai Sentai with the intention of learning about them, know thy enemy, etc. But at the end of nearly every episode, she ends up seeming a little envious, almost as if she wants to join them in some cases. She is the funniest part of the series, though. So the way I decided to talk about this series is to go episode by episode. This is mostly because there isn't much that can be said overall about the whole of the series, but there can be some said about each individual episode. And since I want to discuss this as thoroughly as possible, that's the best way to go. So, yeah, let's go! That was a bad Mario. In the first episode, we start from the very beginning. Ikamon is terrorizing the people, and it's up to our team of 4 girls to stop him. The problem is that they don't know what their group name will be, or what their theme will be. They decide to have a meeting about it. They brainstorm and eventually come up with their theme. Hentai, as Kizuna brings out her duffel bag to show the crown jewel in her collection. After that, we get what will be the title card. While the newly dubbed Hentai Sentai celebrate, Kokomi is upset at their victory, seemingly. Honestly, as a prologue episode, it's not so bad. It's pretty clear that this was done in a relatively short period of time and on a pretty low budget, but of course it would be. Even the failure to fake anger by Kokomi at the end of the episode only adds to the tongue-in-cheek tone. The only question that this episode really brings to mind, and will continue to be brought to mind in every future episode, is who are we as the audience? Are we just common spectators? And if so, how come we see everything that Ikamon and Kokomi can see? Are we also the villains in this story? This is a question that is never answered, by the way, but it is something to think about. This might be the most explicit episode in the series, though even that is debatable to a certain extent. We are greeted with a message basically saying that Ikamon seeked out our hentai sentai and inked them. The thing is that the ink has special powers. That special power? Well, let's just say it really brings out the hentai in Hentai Sentai. Mihono discovers this and the rest of the girls follow suit. Yeah, the plan is successful. And the episode ends with Kokomi being a little envious as she didn't know Ikamon had that power. She wants to experience it for herself, but Ikamon leaves. This is probably the funniest ending to all the episodes in the series. Kokomi's performance and delivery is absolutely perfect. As the first actual episode of this series, it really starts with a strong impression. You have to give the writers of this episode credit. The episode says it's 5 minutes, but since a sizable portion of that time is taken up by the intro and outro card, you have to give it to them to have such a well-paced episode. You could argue that it's mostly because barely anything is happening aside from the girls covered in lotion rubbing up against each other and moaning, but at the very least there's a punchline that, at least for me, lands very solidly, again thanks to Kokomi's performance. This might be one of the best episodes in the series as a whole just on that merit, and I'm not even joking.
ちょうだい。はよ。はよ。ちょうだい。ねえ、なんでちょっと欲しいあれのすごいやつ。ちょうだいよねえ。あれ、やりたいのに。
Episode 3 is a weird one, mostly because of what is pretty explicitly shown in the first episode. Our hentai heroes need to figure out who is going to be in what color costume. I think this should seem weird for most people since we've already seen what color each member is, and so have they. I don't know when in the chronology this episode would have taken place, mostly because while one could argue that this could take place between episodes 1 and 2, at the same time, aside from the intro and outro cards, we haven't seen them in their Sentai costumes yet. The confusion is rather further compounded by the fact that at some point they did make their intro video in which they are all in the correct color costumes, which they watched in episode 1 and reacted in applause to. But whatever, I guess. Don't think too hard about it. They all want to be red, so to settle this dispute, they all play a game of Twister. The champion will have the red costume. I actually find it funny how the subtitle of this episode proclaims that the reason for this episode isn't just an excuse for them to show up the girls' skirts, but we all know that's not true. I really like Christine's semi-sarcastic reaction to losing, and I also like it when Rika uses English when she wins.
Thank you very much.
When Rika predictably wins the tournament, Mihono challenges her to a rematch and we cut to Ikamon with his camera broadcasting live to Kokomi. She then starts calling out for someone to join her since she's all alone. Again, this is really funny. Although I do feel like this is one of the best episodes too, it does feel less like the other episodes, as it feels more like a variety show or YouTube video more than part of a Sentai series. I don't know if that necessarily weakens it in terms of quality just because the series' nature as a whole, but it definitely has the most different presentation to it. I also totally forgot about Mihono's nightmare she has at the beginning of the episode, which also screws with the continuity of the series because she was fighting Ikamon in her green costume despite them apparently not having chosen their costume colors yet. I know, I keep harping on this, but when the episode subtitle exclaims that it's not just for the purpose of showing undies, the case becomes weaker the more you think about it. It's still a funny episode though, and it's probably funnier because of that subtitle. Episode 4 keeps things more interesting in presentation. At the beginning of the episode, the girls are trying to come up with their own hero pose. Kizuna and Rika both share their ideas, but all of them are rejected. Then, Mihono pipes up, saying that she actually interviewed some people what they thought a good hero pose would be. It cuts to a handheld camera with presumably Mihono outside their school interviewing random strangers about the matter. You'll notice that the girl they stop is Kokomi playing a different character, and I thought that was really funny. Afterwards, Mihono reads the suggestions she got, and they all try out the poses. Of course, these hero poses are extremely perverted, and Rika almost tricks Kizuna into flashing herself as part of a made-up pose idea that Rika pretends to read. While they argue, we cut again to Ikamon with his camera, showing what's going on to Kokomi, and while she watches, she comes up with her own ideas for hero poses, for an extended period of time until she awkwardly runs out of ideas and lowers her head in shame. Honestly, this episode is the most forgettable of all of them. Not because it's bad, but because I had to rewatch it and it was as if I was seeing it for the first time. It's pretty amazing how they're able to include certain small set pieces within each episode to set them apart from each other though. In this one, the interview segment really took me by surprise. It almost felt like a real Japanese talk show for a minute there, and I thought it was a pretty neat touch. I also thought it was pretty funny the way they cut Christine's pose out late and she reacts to the fact that she got the name backwards. I kind of wonder why they didn't try a retake, but it did add a touch of humor to the episode. But again, the funniest part was Kokomi. I keep saying it at this point, but her stingers at the end of every episode make her scenes instantly the most memorable. The fact her enthusiasm is slowly overpowered with shame as the camera harshly stares at her struggle to make her own poses off the cuff is really funny. Episode 5 opens with our first action scene of the series. The action scene is represented in some pretty cool artwork. Ikamon is attacking the city, and our heroes come in to save the day in their giant mech. But then something terrible happens. Rika gets a leg cramp, and she can't work the controls, so they get beaten up by Ikamon. They return to school, where Rika apologizes for ruining their chances at victory. After some reassurance from Mihono, Kizuna comes up with an idea to make sure they can keep in shape for their next battle. Hula hoop! Each member of the group takes turns using the hula hoop. Rika does okay, Christine doesn't do as well, Mihono does as well as Rika but cleaner, and Kizuna, after assuring the others many times about how good she is at it, proceeds to do the worst. Of course, if you paid attention during the music video, you know Kizuna is already terrible at hula hooping, except this time her technique is worse. Who thinks jumping is a good technique for using a hula hoop? Anyway, after that, Kokomi is watching and happens to have a hula hoop of her own. Immediately, she shows off her skills, bragging arrogantly to the camera while hula hooping. And then the hula hoop falls, and once again, her arrogance melts away into shame. She looks up briefly, presumably off camera, to a director and seems to remember that she needs to pick up the hula hoop or something. She picks it up and apologizes. This is another strong episode. It's not unlike other Japanese variety shows to have a hula hoop contest between the episode's participants, so it's not necessarily unfitting for something like that to be included here as well. I really like the ending, again thanks to Kokomi's performance. She's just really funny. Her reactions aren't over the top or loud. In fact, her understated performance is what makes it even funnier than it already was written to be. But the rest of the girls are really funny too. The way they try the hula hoop varies in such different ways, and each of their reactions so unique that it makes you look forward to the next one in a way that I can't quite explain. Yeah, of course the low angles they use here are meant to emphasize less of the hula hoop and more of something else, but for me it will always be the reactions that I look forward to the most. Episode 6 is very different from the previous episodes. We are introduced to some exposition about Kokomi's plan to spy on our hentai heroes by sending in a spy to their base while they are gone. As the spy enters the girls' base of operations and begins searching around, the girls are heard returning to their base. Quickly, the spy finds a place to hide, posing between two mannequins hoping to blend in with them. After Christine, Kizuna, and Mihono enter the room, Mihono says the smell is off and it would seem like Ikamon is in there somewhere. As the girls look around the room to see where the intruder would be, Christine notices the spy actually posing pretty well between two mannequins. Immediately upon investigating this anomaly, the three girls detain the spy for questioning. Rika enters the room to the scene, and the others explain to her what just happened. Just as Rika begins questioning the spy, the girls have an OWO what's this moment and notices the spy's bulge. It turns out that while the spy looks like a girl, they still have boy parts. After the spy is sent back to Kokomi and is scolded for her failure, it then turns quickly into a pretty long self-introduction and interview of Akari. This goes on for the rest of the episode. So I just wanted to say that this is the weakest episode, not because of Akari, but because it's pretty clear that this is just an advertisement for something unrelated to Million Girls Z. Maybe Akari has signed on to the agency and is new, but as a whole, this really feels more like a filler episode. As a filler episode, it wouldn't be so bad if it weren't for the fact that this is the penultimate episode of the series, a series with only 7 episodes. I don't know if you'd call the plot to this episode trans panic. I don't know if that's a thing, but whatever it is, this kind of humor lands with me very rarely, and this is no exception. Oh, look, it's a girl, but she doesn't have girl parts. Isn't that crazy? I just don't understand what about that kind of punchline makes it funny. And if I'm going to be honest, I always tune out by the time of the interview. It's just uninteresting. Definitely a weaker episode overall, but maybe that's part of the parody? I don't really know. Episode 7 begins with our 4 heroes capturing and beating up Kokomi before finishing her off by throwing her off the top of a building. Kokomi does not take too kindly from being humiliated in such a way, so she decides to hatch her new plan. While eating squid, she tells Ikamon to capture all the Sentai except for their leader, Rika, so an epic final showdown could be set up. One by one, each member is captured and taken away. Kizuna is tricked into going into the hall where she is kidnapped, Christine is baited with cake, and Mihono is just ambushed randomly by some old guy. Probably the guy who narrates the series, voices Ikamon, and sings the theme. Rika walks into the HQ to notice that nobody is there. As she begins to wonder where everyone is, in true cartoonish nature, a suction cup arrow is fired at the wall with a message attached to it. It tells her that if she wants to see her friends again, she has to go to a certain location, ultimately to face down Kokomi, one-on-one. It ends with Kokomi promising that she will definitely see everyone again next time, ominously. This episode is really good at building up for the grand finale. Although it may seem a bit rushed how the girls managed to capture and beat up Kokomi so easily, and it kind of makes you wonder what took Kokomi so long to actually enact that plan of hers, the suspense is pretty good. Definitely better than something like this would ever be expected to be. Of course, we finally get that butt shot of Kokomi so many were probably hoping for, and I have to say that using a blow-up doll as a dummy for Kokomi being thrown off the building is probably one of the most appropriately tokusatsu things this series could possibly have done. It's also pretty funny how dumb Christine and Mihono are. I actually have no idea what Mihono is doing in that room. She just sort of walks in and sings to herself, all while the camera gets right in her face. It's pretty funny. This episode is a good mix of humor and suspense. It's just a shame that, as it stands now, it has no resolution. So, obviously there were 8 episodes. I know because I remember watching all 8 of them back when they were still available in 2017. But sometime between then and now, episode 8 was removed or made private because any links that were ever shared of it led to a message saying that the video was no longer available. And because of how relatively underground this whole project was from the get-go, it's sort of become lost media. The only evidence we have of an 8th episode ever existing is a short clip used at the beginning of the first episode when we see Rika walking into an abandoned warehouse solo, seemingly prepared for her final showdown. I wish I could describe what the final episode was like, but it's been so long I don't remember how it went or even how it ended. I actually bought this Million Girls Z DVD with hopes that maybe there would be something related to the series in it. There isn't. So unfortunately, this is where our journey ends with this series. Until I or someone else can find a copy of it mirrored somewhere, we will never learn how this story ended. And that's sort of how Million Girls Z is as a whole, really. This project, which was supposed to be a reboot of a seemingly long-standing concept, rapidly dissipated over the course of a year. This idol parody project was made the subject for a video for the last time in 2015 when they performed a short concert at an AV convention, and quickly the YouTube channel began introducing new talents, showing some of the creative endeavors of Rika before she went ahead and made her own YouTube channel, where she is still active to this day actually. And the channel moved away from MGZ and into the realm of adult toy ads and reviews, with the only remaining member being Kizuna. Overall, it's a pretty mysterious project that, while it might remain that way, we can at least say that while yes, this parody of a parody may have seen its genesis among the slew of other idol Sentai parodies spawned by Momoclo's popularizing it, Million Girls Z became its own entity and provided entertainment that was, while interesting and funny, was as fleeting and brief as the MGZ reboot itself was.